Imagine this. A courtroom. A judge says, okay, maybe the sentencing process wasn't absolutely perfect, but the final sentence, not too harsh.
Right.
But then the appeal court orders something completely different.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of fascinating situation we're diving into today.
Mhm.
We're looking at a legal appeal from back in 1998 in Hong Kong,
And our sources for this deep dive are the official judgment documents, straight from the Court of Appeal.
which gives us a really solid look at the reasoning, not just the outcome.
Exactly. So the scene is set around a young man, let's call him Zhang San. He was initially convicted on 2 counts of robbing taxi drivers.
And get this, both incidents happen on the exact same day, August 30th, 1996.
Wow, same day.
Each robbery involved HK $600. Not a huge amount, maybe in the grand scheme, but certainly significant for the drivers.
Definitely. And here's a key detail in both robberies. It was actually Zhang San's older brother who threatened the drivers. He used a paper knife.
Okay, so the brother was the one with the weapon.
Right. Zhang San was well, he was present during both incidents.
That distinction is really important legally, isn't it? Presence versus active threat.
Absolutely. The trial judge handling the initial case was Judge Zaoqian, who was a temporary district court judge at the time.
Okay. So what did Judge Zhu decide initially?
He sentenced Zhang San to a total of 3 years and 9 months in prison.
Right. 3 years, 9 months. How did he arrive at that figure? It sounds quite specific.
It was quite a process.
Yeah.
He started with a sort of baseline, a guideline of 4 years for each charge.
4 years per charge of that.
Then, because there were 2 offenders, the brothers, he added another 6 months.
So that brings it up to, 4 plus 4 is 8 plus 6 months? No, hang on.
No, sorry. It was 4 years per charge, considered together somehow, then increased by 6 months total because of multiple offenders, leading to a starting point of 9 years overall, if served consecutively, perhaps. The judgment implies a complex start.
Right, okay, I see. A 9-year conceptual starting point, maybe?
Then he applied something called the totality principle.
Ah, yes, totality. That's about making sure the overall sentence feels, just and proportionate, not just adding up sentences mechanically.
Exactly. So applying that principle brought the total down to 5 years and 3 months.
A significant reduction already.
But he didn't stop there.
Okay.
He knocked off another 3 months because Zhang San had no previous criminal record.
First offense, that makes sense.
And then, crucially, he considered the influence of the older brother. And Zhang San's age, he was only 16 years and 9 months old.
Very young.
Yeah. So that led to another big reduction. 1 year and 3 months off.
Which gets us to the final 3 years and 9 months. Wow. Quite the calculation.
It really was. But here's the twist. The Court of Appeal later looked at this and said, well, the final number, 3 years, 9 months, wasn't manifestly excessive.
Meaning not outrageously wrong or completely out of line.
Right. But they did sort of flag the process. They hinted that maybe adjusting each charge individually before applying the totality principle might have been a better approach procedurally.
Interesting. So the method wasn't ideal, but the result wasn't necessarily unjust in their initial view. It speaks to the importance of how you get to the answer in law, not just the answer itself.
Exactly. So Zhang San appeals. His lawyer, Barrister Xu, makes a key argument.
Okay, what was the angle?
He argued that Judge Zhou didn't seem to give enough weight to 3 important reports, one from a probation officer, one from a training center, and one from a detention center.
Ah, the institutional reports. Those usually give insight into the person's background, behavior, suitability for different programs. Very important stuff, especially for a young offender.
Right. And Barrister Zhu pointed out that the judge didn't even mention these reports in his written sentencing reasons.
That does seem like a potential oversight. You'd expect those to be addressed.
Although there was a counterpoint. The prosecution, perhaps, or just noted in the judgment, was that Judge Zhou did list sentencing guidelines from the Court of Appeal in his reasoning.
Implying he must have considered all relevant factors, including, presumably, the reports.
Sort of, yeah. And the reports were presented in court on the sentencing day, and the defense lawyer actually based his arguments on them. So the idea was, it's pretty unlikely the judge just flat out ignored them.
Okay, so maybe not explicitly mentioned, but perhaps implicitly considered a bit ambiguous.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
But the core of the defense appeal was really focused on what was in those reports.
Which was?
Apparently, they were very positive about Zhang San, and crucially, they all recommended he be placed in a training center.
A training center, not prison. That's a major difference. Focused on rehab, skills, education.
Exactly. That was the defense's plea. Look at these positive reports. Look at the recommendations.
So how did the Court of Appeal respond to that?
They looked at the reports themselves,
Hmm.
and they agreed they found them, quote, very positive.
Okay.
They noted the strong recommendations for a training center placement, and the court itself felt this would be beneficial for Zhang San and actually for society too.
Interesting. They're explicitly considering the societal benefit of rehabilitation there.
Yes. And they also really emphasized those mitigating factors we mentioned earlier.
Like his age.
His age, definitely 16 and 9 months. Judge Zhu's own finding that he was influenced by his older brother.
Right, the influence factor.
And also the point that Zhang San apparently didn't realize his brother was going to use a paper knife, maybe suggesting he wasn't fully aware of how serious it would get.
Kind of painting a picture of someone swept along, perhaps. Less culpable than the brother.
Perhaps. But the court was also very firm on one point.
Which was?
That robbing taxi drivers is a serious crime. Full stop. They said even at 16, Zhang San should have known it was wrong and serious. They weren't excusing the act itself.
That's important. Balancing the mitigating factors against the gravity of the offense, it's not about letting him off the hook entirely.
No, not at all. But then came the crucial part of their decision. Despite saying Judge Zhu hadn't made a reversible error.
Meaning an error serious enough to legally require overturning the sentence?
Exactly. Despite that, the Court of Appeal put enormous weight on Zhang San's youth. His lack of life experience. They actually used the phrase, not worldly wise.
Not worldly wise. That's quite evocative.
It is. And they focused on those positive reports with the strong recommendations. And, well, they expressed a degree of sympathy for his overall situation.
So even without a clear legal error compelling them to act, they felt the circumstances warranted a different outcome, more of a judgment call based on the specifics.
It seems very much like that. So the final decision was, the appeal was allowed.
Wow.
The original prison sentence, overturned, gone.
So what happened instead?
He was ordered to be placed in a training center.
Just as the reports recommended.
Precisely. Their rationale was clear. Give this young man a significant chance at rehabilitation. They pointed to the positive reports, his youth, and the fact he'd already spent over 7 months locked up awaiting the appeal.
So that time served was also factored in. They felt a different path was now more appropriate.
Exactly. So, recapping this deep dive. Initial sentence, 3 years, 9 months prison for robbery. Appeal court says, no reversible error, but considering everything. Sentence overturned, ordered to a training center instead.
It really throws a spotlight on that tension, doesn't it? Punishment versus rehabilitation, especially with young offenders, especially when there's influence from others involved.
Absolutely. And it makes you think about how much weight different factors get in sentencing. The reports, the age, the seriousness of the crime.
And the appeals process itself, allowing for that second look, that different perspective. It shows the system has mechanisms, sometimes, to prioritize potential over pure punishment.
Yeah, the aha moment here is definitely that the court could have just said, well, no reversible error, sentence stands. They didn't. They chose to intervene based on a broader picture, focusing on reform.
It highlights that human element, that discretion within the legal framework. It's not always just black and white rules. There's interpretation and judgment involved.
Definitely. It really makes you think.
It does, and it brings us to a really interesting point to leave you, the listener, with.
Okay, what's the final thought?
Thinking about Zhang San's case, when should the main focus of the justice system shift from punishment towards rehabilitation? And what factors, youth, influence, potential, the nature of the crime, should really carry the most weight when making that call, not just for the individual, but keeping the community's safety and well-being in mind, too? Where do you draw that line?